Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet, and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hey, Scott.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
Pretty good night. Just status quo here, and looking forward to talking a little bit more soccer again. I don't know why, but it seems like it's been a long week. It seems like it's been a while since we recorded, even though I know it's just been 7 days.
Yeah. I mean, a lot has happened, obviously. Lots of soccer last weekend that I'm excited to talk about tonight. And, of course, I also went to Toronto for the weekend and just got back a few days ago. So it has been a long week. No, it's we're on the eve of Thanksgiving long weekend. So not that much soccer to talk about this weekend. Excited to dive into what we can.
For sure. But, why don't we dial it back and talk a little bit more about your soccer experience if you're good with talking about it. So you got to check one thing off the bucket list, I guess, eh?
I actually got to check two things off the bucket list because on the plane back, we had an amazing view of the Aurora Borealis, which I have actually never seen before. I'm kind of embarrassed to say. But yeah, no, the first thing was watching Lionel Messi play live, which I've been saying for about 10 years that if he was ever coming to Vancouver or Seattle or anything like that, I would have to try and make an effort. I missed the opportunity in 2016 when Argentina played, I believe it was Bolivia in Seattle. Couldn't get to that. So then when he joined Inter Miami last year or 2 years ago, I said, when he comes to Canada, whether it's Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver, I'll try and make the effort to get to that game. And fortunately, I didn't buy a ticket to the Vancouver game because I had a feeling he wouldn't play on artificial turf. Considering Miami was playing Toronto this past weekend, back in February or March, I splurged on a couple of tickets, and my wife and I kind of planned a trip to Toronto around that. And we managed to get there. We brought our baby with us. It was overall a pretty successful outing. We had free accommodation, staying at a family member's condo, which was empty. So lucked out in that regard, and managed to make it out to BMO Field for the first time.
I'll ask you, what do you think of BMO?
I mean, it's not that flashy or anything. I think it's exactly as you described it, which is functional but unremarkable. But good view of the lake. And unfortunately, our back was to downtown, so I couldn't see like the CN Tower from my seat or anything like that. But pitch looked fine and the capacity was decent. Obviously, it was a sellout. Overall, the match itself was fairly cagey. The only goal was scored in stoppage time. So it was a 1-0 win for Miami. Honestly, I don't have any regrets. Messi got on at the hour mark and didn't do very much. But just being, like I said, being able to check seeing him off my bucket list was the main part of it. There were a couple of pitch invaders, which always make for an interesting spectacle. I guess that's a regular thing for Miami these days.
If you are a new listener to our podcast, Scott, what is the YYC Soccer Podcast all about?
So our podcast covers all levels of soccer in Calgary. So we talk about amateur, collegiate, and professional teams and players from the city's soccer community. And at the moment, of course, we have a lot to talk about with regards to the city's professional team, Cavalry FC, as well as the various post-secondary teams that call Calgary home.
This week, we're going to go through a lot of the topics we usually go through, but before we started recording, we thought we were going to switch it up a little bit here. So this week, we're going to lead off with some post-secondary talk. We're going to talk about SAIT, and we're going to talk about U Sports men's and women's soccer. And then we're going to also talk about Cavalry and their match last week against Pacific. And we also have an interview this week. Scott, who's our interview with?
Yeah, earlier this week, we interviewed Myla Schneider, who is a senior with the University of Maine Black Bears, a very successful NCAA Division I team that made the national tournament last year and is on track to repeat that feat this time around, with much of their success thanks to the contributions of Calgarians, including Myla.
Yeah, they've got 7 Calgarians, and it's been on my radar screen to get someone associated with the University of Maine to talk about the connections to Calgary and stuff. So, this is a topic I've wanted to really delve into for a while. So we'll run the interview in a little bit, but let's get started this week, and let's talk some post-secondary soccer, and let's start with SAIT.
Hi, this is Natalie Gervitz, and you're listening to YYC Soccer Podcast.
So the main headline from SAIT this past weekend is the women's team, which is rocking an unbeaten 9-0 record in the ACAC South. They've moved up in the national rankings one spot. They're currently ranked second, up from their third spot last week.
Yeah, well, they just keep rolling. They had 2 more victories this past weekend. I think neither of them would be considered close. They played Olds and they won 8-0, and they played Red Deer and won 4-0. And I think they've had quite a few clean sheets. I think it's been a while since anyone scored on them.
At least 4 games in a row they've had clean sheets. So it's not just a high-powered offense that they have. It's also a very sturdy defensive line and good goalkeeping. So SAIT is, as they were last year, just completely dominating the South Division, or easily, it seems, going to reclaim their division title, and they'll be the favorites for the conference title as well come playoff time.
So this week, the women have a couple matches. On Friday afternoon, they play Ambrose in another Calgary derby. That game is an away game for SAIT. It's on Ambrose's home field. And then on Saturday, they travel up to Camrose and they play Augustana. And that's one of those rare non-doubleheader matches that usually happens with SAIT.
So shifting focus to the men's now, as you mentioned, the ACAC teams always do double headers. So the women play and then the men play the same team right after or before. So the men will be playing Ambrose as well. So we'll have 2 Calgary derbies in the ACAC this weekend. Men are coming off an interesting weekend. They beat Olds 3-2, but lost to Red Deer Polytechnic 1-0, which means that they are currently tied for second in the ACAC South with 4 wins, 3 losses, and 1 draw. They share second spot with Lethbridge Kodiaks, and they are behind the Red Deer Kings by 1 point, but Red Deer, as well as Lethbridge, have a game in hand. And SAIT, I don't think they've been as strong in the regular season as they were last year, but last year SAIT very weirdly kind of faltered as soon as the playoffs started, and they didn't manage to win the conference title like you and I were expecting they would. So maybe this year will be a bit different, and they will have a less convincing regular season, but punctuate their 2024 with a strong showing at the ACAC championships.
For sure. Do you know why there's no doubleheader with Augustana this weekend?
No.
Augustana doesn't have a men's team.
Oh, they don't. Okay, I could have guessed that, but I, for some reason, did not.
Hi, this is Grace Doherty, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Let's move on and talk about U Sports, and we'll talk about women's soccer first. And a couple of big matches for the Dinos this weekend in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, the Dinos did their Saskatchewan road trip this past weekend. Fairly successful, but they didn't get 6 points from it. They tied the Saskatchewan Huskies 1-1 on Saturday, and then followed that up with a 3-2 win over the Regina Cougars on Sunday. So they are now 8-1-1.
Yeah, tied with McEwen, and it did work out well for them overall, though, in the national rankings. They moved up from 9th to 7th this week.
Yeah, so still representing Calgary in the top 10. And, the final match of the season, which is taking place on October 20th at home, will be really intriguing because it is against the team that they are tied for first with.
Yeah, McEwen has been having a really strong year, as they often do. So I got a feeling it's going to probably come down to that game to see who wins the conference title. But it looks like right now they're probably in a position where, the playoffs are kind of in hand, but that first spot is certainly in play.
So that game is taking place next Sunday, October 20th at Dinosaur Field. But the Dinos are playing before that. They have a home-and-home series with Lethbridge this weekend.
Yeah, on Friday and Saturday, and I believe the home match is on Friday. So, and to recap, Mount Royal women's side, they played UBC away in BC, and they lost 3-0. And then they did pull out a victory at Prince George. UNBC, they beat them 1-0.
Yep, that was their third win of 2024. So they're now 3-2-6 in the Pacific Division, 6th place at the moment, which probably means that similar to last year, they're their hopes of securing playoff football are starting to fade if they haven't already.
And I think I have this right, Scott, but maybe you can correct me. So the way it works is one of the 4 Alberta teams, like MacEwan, Alberta, Calgary, and Mount Royal, they go over to the Pacific Division. They play for 2 years in the Pacific Division, and then it gets rotated out with another team. I know Lethbridge is exempt from this for some reason. So this is Mount Royal's second year. So that means that I think next year, one of those other 3 teams is going to get put into the Pacific and Mount Royal goes back into the Prairie.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing, but I think you're right. It's 2 years that you have to kind of almost suffer through because it's more travel, often tougher opposition. But you would think that these 2 years of adversity that MRU has gone through will help strengthen the program in the long run. They can re-enter the Prairie Division next year with maybe some battle-hardened veterans. They're kind of toward the bottom of their Pacific standings this year, and that's unfortunate for the players who are in their last year or so. But at least they get to go out, playing against some tough opposition, such as UBC Thunderbirds.
For sure. And one thing, now that my curiosity is piqued, I'm going to try and figure out what team switches out with them next year. So we'll see if I don't know if it's the Dinos or anything. I guess it's one of the other 3 teams. So I'm going to try and track that down this week. So be interesting to see.
And Jason, just before we shift over to talk about the men's Canada West teams from Calgary, you did put down here, and I think it's worth throwing out there, that one of our former podcast guests who doesn't play for a team in Calgary recently set a school record.
Grace Masala scored her 30th career goal this past weekend, which puts her in very rarefied air. I don't know, it was in one of the social media posts I saw, but there have been very few players who have attained that mark in career scoring. So kudos to Grace for sure.
For sure, yeah. She became the 15th player in Canada West women's soccer history to reach that milestone of 30 goals. Her goal led to a very dominant 4-0 win over the Winnipeg Westmen without allowing a single shot on target. So not a bad way to enter that kind of prestigious company.
And the other thing I was just going to mention too is, like, when we had Grace on the podcast last year, she had just had a pretty significant knee injury. So she was, I don't even think she played any soccer this summer even. She's just finally gotten to matches again here with MacEwan. So she's really been able to get her rehab done and get back and start playing at a high level pretty much right off the bat. So yeah, kudos to her for sure.
I'm Caden Rogozinski, and this is YYC Soccer Podcast.
All right, so moving over now to the men's teams. Seems like status quo in terms of how they've performed. For the University of Calgary, we saw the Dinos beat MacEwan quite comprehensively, 5-1. And then the following day, they took on Alberta in that highly touted match that we talked about last week. And not too surprisingly, that game ended in a 1-1 tie.
Yeah, so tight match, and they were able to get a point there. But I haven't really spent a lot of time paying attention to what the Golden Bears are up to. But, they've got Rodane Cato, who was down here in Calgary this past summer and was playing pretty well for Foothills. And they've got a couple other players with Calgary connections. But I think that they've put together a pretty good team this year, obviously.
Yeah, I believe Marcus Velato, it's a guy who's a former FC Edmonton player. I think he's still on the team. I know he's been really strong for them since he joined. It seems like that's the team that the Dinos will have to try to overcome. I don't think they can catch them for first place in the regular season standings, but there's still the playoffs to think about. At the moment, Dinos are in second place with 6 wins, 5 draws, but only 1 loss. So they've clearly become a team this year under Ramon Mifflin that is hard to beat.
And then let's talk about Mount Royal. So they were playing the same 2 clubs. They played Alberta and MacEwan just in reverse order. And Alberta the day before they tied the Dinos, they went to Mount Royal campus and they won rather convincingly 4-1.
Yeah, so a very mixed weekend for the Cougars as they rebounded from that 4-1 loss to the Golden Bears with a pretty convincing win over MacEwan, 4-0. Defending champs have had an interesting season. They're in third place at the moment, a couple points back of their crosstown rivals, the UC Dinos, with 5 wins, 5 draws, and 2 losses. But they have a pretty healthy gap over the fourth place team, which is the Lethbridge Pronghorns.
Making the playoffs isn't going to be a big issue, but yeah, it's a bit of uneven results. So this weekend, neither the men's Cougars or the men's Dinos teams are playing for Thanksgiving weekend. And neither team is currently in the top 10. I think both clubs are close, but they have not cracked into that top list.
This is Myla Schneider, and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Okay, so as mentioned at the start of the episode, we had a great interview with senior University of Maine defender Myla Schneider. Jason, it was cool to talk with her because, of course, like more than a quarter of Maine's roster is made up of Calgarian players. But Myla was really the one who started this trend by going to Maine in the first place.
Yeah, I was aware that she was the first one there, but I didn't really know the sort of some of the mechanics of how it all happened and sort of the connection her with coaches. And she'll talk about that. But yeah, it's really turned into a real pipeline there because I think now they even have 3 freshmen there. And so it just seems like it would not surprise me if as long as this coaching staff is in place and as long as they're having success, I think we're going to see no shortage of Calgarians continue to make their way east in future years.
Yeah. And you talk about success, which is exactly what the Maine Black Bears have experienced, since Calgarians have joined their team. Obviously last year, very historic year for the program. And it seems like this year they're off to a really great, I don't want to say start because the season's, closer to the end than the beginning, but they're having a great campaign once again. And it seems like Myla has played a big part in that. She is a, 90-minute per match player, probably one of the first names on the team sheet, has clearly established herself as a leader and as a very important member of the Black Bears defense.
Absolutely. And without any further ado, let's run that interview now and listen to our chat with Myla Schneider. We'd like to welcome Myla Schneider to the podcast. Myla is from Calgary, and she's currently playing for the Maine Black Bears as a center back, and she's in her 5th season with the club. Thanks for joining the podcast this week, Myla.
Thanks so much for having me.
Can we start by just getting a bit of your background, your club career in Calgary, over the years, who you played for and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. I started out when I was really, really young. I started out at Calgary West, and then I moved over to Blizzards when I was about 11 or 12, I believe, to their 03 team there. I had a bunch of different coaches. I know that you had like Aislinn and Nat on the podcast already. I played with both of them throughout many, many years in club. And then when we were kind of in, I believe it was U16, like we had Diogo as our coach, and he was super helpful with like the recruiting process and like just like gaining confidence as a player to get recruited to like a university. And then I met the former assistant coach at Maine, Coach Pete, at Top ID Camp. And then rest was history from there. Visited Maine and loved it.
And as we were talking about before we hit the record button, you're not the only player from Calgary on the Maine team. There are a lot of Calgarians out there, but we do understand that you were the first to kind of kick off this trend of going out east to play for the Black Bears.
Yeah, I actually knew one of the girls coming in from Ontario because our dads played hockey together way back in the day. So that's kind of part of what attracted me to Maine. And then after my first season here, my sister transferred from Florida Gulf Coast. And then a lot of her teammates from throughout the days in like Rex programs and whatnot started to become more interested in Maine. And then we kind of had Tori commit, Becca transferred in. And then most recently, we got 3 younger players that were interested in Maine and committed.
Yeah, so I think there's, Jason, you put down 7 Calgarians on the roster right now. That's incredible. That's probably close to 1/4 of the roster.
Yeah, it definitely is. We've got think we have 13 Canadians on our roster, 7 of them from Calgary. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. Pretty much unprecedented, I would think. So what's it like playing with your sister, like playing at this level with her? And I think there's 3 different sister combos on the team overall. So what's that like?
There are 3 different sister combos on the team. And honestly, I love playing with my sister so much. It's so nice to kind of have like a piece of home away from home, but also like we play right beside each other on the field. She's my fullback. So we just have like really great connection, and just I can always count on her. She can always count on me. So it's really great. And then we can also like, we love competing as well together. So it's awesome.
We noticed that the Black Bears are leading their conference again this year. Won the conference last year, made it to the national tournament. So it seems like things are going really well for the team. Can you comment on how the season has gone? Noticed it's like Maine has a really strong defense this year, only 9 goals against in 11 matches. But how does it compare to last year? Because last year was, unprecedented for the team.
Yeah, I think this year is a little bit different because we have more people that are coming after us this year, whereas last year we were kind of like a little bit of an underdog with the season that we had. So I think this year we're just really focusing on like chasing and pursuing the title again instead of like waiting and letting people kind of come on to us. So it's been a really great mentality so far this season about each game's a new game and really just working and progressing as a team.
How has the season been going for you? Like, how do you like rate your performances? Like, one thing we noticed in sort of a bit of our advanced research is that you pretty much always play 90 minutes. And I think Scott made the note here that you played 5,000 minutes already with the team. So that you're basically out there all the time.
Yeah, I've been really enjoying this season so far. I think I've been like getting better each game and just been growing a lot as a player, especially just with like varying the way that I play each game. And it's been really great to play with so many great players, and we've been able to play some top opponents. So it's been really nice to challenge ourselves, and yeah, season's been going well so far.
One thing we noticed before the season got underway, you were placed on the list of defenders to watch by United soccer coaches. I'm curious how that felt. Did it add any kind of pressure or expectations, or did you just kind of take it in stride?
It was a really, really nice recognition to get. And of course, I think it just added to like more motivation to just have the best season possible. Of course, it probably added like a little bit of expectations that I like give myself, but I think that it was a nice recognition. And
looking ahead, beyond this season, what are the goals for yourself and for the team for the rest of the season?
I think for myself, I just want to continue enjoying like every last moment because it is my last season. So just really taking it all in and enjoying the process. And I think for team goals, we really, really want to win a back-to-back championship and advance beyond the first or second round of the tournament, and just have a great rest of the year.
In terms of personal aspirations, as you mentioned, it's your last year of university soccer. I'm curious if you're hoping to play professionally after, if like the Northern Super League is on the radar for you, or maybe a team abroad. What are you kind of thinking about for after post-secondary?
For sure. I think that I would really, really love to continue playing soccer, whether that's abroad, locally, that I'm not really sure yet. Haven't been able to look into that too much. I think certainly abroad is like very much of interest to me, and just play for a few years before I do potential further education and maybe at med school or something like that.
Awesome. What's your degree in?
Biology.
Okay.
When you get to the point as a senior, I guess even as a 5th-year player, like knowing you're going into your last year, what's the process like for if you are going to start thinking about going pro? Like, I know there's a lot of NCAA rules and stuff, but is there any sort of contact or anything like that, or is that all left until after the season is over?
Yeah, I would say it's primarily done after the season's over. I know one of my teammates has already been in contact with like a few different teams, just like because she's graduating at the end of the semester. But I would say most people, I believe, kind of have an agent who kind of starts looking at that during the season. But the work is primarily done kind of end to after season, from my knowledge.
Right.
And you're graduating in the spring, in April or March. So is there anything else you'd like to add? Maybe some shout outs back in Calgary? Feel free to kind of finish off the interview in any way you'd kind of like.
Yeah, I guess I'll just shout out my family and any of my coaches that I've had. That so thankful for everything. Thank you guys for having me on.
Of course, and thanks for coming on. Best of luck with the rest of the season with the Black Bears and whatever comes after for you. We'll be following along with a lot of interest.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Myla for coming on our podcast and doing an interview with us. Jason, it was great to talk to her because, as we've talked about before, we've had 5 members of another NCAA program from Calgary on our podcast, but this was the first time that we managed to talk to someone from the Maine Black Bears.
It was nice to get the perspective of from that school, and also, even if you can recall, a call back to one of our previous episodes where we did our speculating of 5 Calgarians who we thought had a pretty good chance of being on an NSL roster next year. We interviewed 4 of the 5. The one we didn't interview was Myla, and now we've completed all 5 people on the list.
And I want to throw another thing out there, which I thought was an interesting coincidence. She was the 3rd player from the Blizzard 03 girls team that we've interviewed. And Jason, we didn't mean to do that. That was just a coincidence that we happened to talk to 3 teammates from that Blizzard team.
Oh yeah, it's kind of funny how it did turn out that way. If I think for SAIT, when we requested an interview because the team was doing so well, that's who was suggested to us, and Natalie was great. And then and when we had on as well, like, because we wanted to get someone from the Dinos, and then originally even with Maine, we were trying to figure out a way to talk about the whole connection to Calgary, and then it all just came together. So.
This is Tommy Wilden Jr., and you're listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast.
All right, let's talk about Cavalry FC, and let's talk about last week's match. They went to Victoria and played Pacific on Saturday afternoon and came away with a resounding victory.
Yeah, this was one of their most high-scoring games of the season, I believe. I don't know if they've put 4 in a single game yet, other than this. 4-1 win puts them up to 2nd place, 2 points ahead of Ottawa. A very happy evening for Tommy Wilden Jr. and co.
Bizarre beginning to this match. I don't think I've seen anything quite like that before, Scott, where a keeper is out of the box like in the first couple minutes of the match, and like I don't know what else it could be, but other than just a complete lapse, like just of not realizing something, because that one just mystified me.
Right. So what happened in the 3rd minute is Pacific's goalkeeper, Emil Gazdov, rushed out of the 18-yard box and punched the ball away from Cavalry. I can't remember which Cavalry player was chasing it down.
Jay Hurd.
Yeah. So, 3rd minute in, and he gets a red card for doing that, which, he impeded a clear goal scoring opportunity. So you can't really argue with it. But it meant that Pacific had to play down a man for virtually the entire game. Sean Melvin had to come in as the reserve goalkeeper, probably feeling quite cold, right? I don't even know if he would have warmed up properly, but it gave Cavalry, the advantage they needed to really take this game by the throat. And, in terms of looking at who scored, there's a lot of talking points, aren't there?
The first goal was Jay Herdman opening his account with Cavalry, and it was a play where it was Ali Musi with the cross in, and a beautiful ball from Musi, and Herdman connected quite nicely. He got his head on the ball, and it was a real nice goal and a real impressive effort from both Herdman and Musi.
Yeah, Musi's ball was pinpoint, but I also really want to commend Jay Herdman for his run. He timed it perfectly, and I think both of the defenders that he kind of ghosted behind were taller than him. So the fact that he was able to score with his head on this play was, really surprising and impressive. And yeah, I think he's played 3 games now for Cavalry, maybe 4. But this was his first time in the starting 11, and he really took advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, I've been impressed with what I've seen with him so far. I think he's injected some energy, and he's obviously, he's got some skill. He's not a big physically imposing presence. He's I actually looked, and he's listed, I believe, at 5'7". So he's not a big guy, but he does seem to bring a lot of energy to the table, and yeah, like I said, a lot of skill too.
Yeah, and he showed that in this game. And then the next goal was actually Pacific tying it up, wasn't it? It was a bit of a against the run of play moment, but they managed to earn a penalty kick off a foul from Marco Carducci.
It was interesting because I really thought that when Pacific got that tied it up, the game kind of seemed a little bit more even there for a while. And despite the fact that the Cavs were up a man, Pacific really started to show pretty well there in sort of that second part of the first half. So it was, a little bit surprising to see the teams go in level into the halftime break. But yeah, the Pacific kind of was able to make that happen. But it definitely changed in the second half.
Yeah, I think Pacific was clearly starting to tire in the second half. They really lost their defensive rhythm and composure. And we saw 2 goals from a Cavalry player who has been pivotal to the team's offense this year, but really was on quite a scoring drought. And he managed to get 2 goals in this one.
So Tobias Warzewski got the second and third goals for Cavalry, and in rather quick succession. So I think definitely the drought is over now. Both goals were, well taken. And yeah, I think just sometimes, isn't that just kind of how it goes when for a lot of times for goal scorers, sometimes they just, they come in bunches, right?
Yeah, that was the case with, if you remember, Dominique Malonga back in 2019, who got into double-digit scoring for Cavalry, even though it seemed like he always would only ever score 2 goals at a time. And then he'd go, 4 or 5 games without scoring, and then he'd score another 2 goals. So he always maintained that goal every other game kind of rate, even though it never seemed like he was scoring every other game, if that makes sense. But I really thought Warzewski's goals were nice in this game. The first one he kind of made happen too, with a neat little back heel on the play leading up to it. And then the second one, he just showed a lot of composure to slot the ball into the bottom corner off the post from a pretty far distance out. But yeah, it seems like he's, after that little niggling injury that he experienced a month or 2 ago, he seems to have gotten over that.
And the fourth goal was Noel Wright opening his account with Cavalry with a nice effort. Just, I don't know, it was only just a matter of a couple minutes after the third goal.
Yeah, I actually I'm kind of drawing a blank. I'm trying to picture the goal. I can't remember what it looked like, but it has taken longer than I thought it would for Lowell Wright to open his account, especially when you consider the fact that he nearly scored 10 seconds after coming in for his Cavalry debut a few months ago. So I was happy to see him get on the scoring sheet. And I'm hopeful that he can get another 1 or 2 before the end of the season.
Yeah, and he was one of the 3 players brought in by Tommy Wilden Jr. at halftime. So I did hear in the post-match press conference that they made a conscious effort during halftime to make 3 subs to completely freshen things up, and then put some fresh legs out there right from the beginning of the half to kind of wear down Pacific. So they brought in Charlie Trafford, and coming back from injury, and Fraser Aird, who's coming back from injury, and Lowell Wright, who I believe did play last week, but he's also been coming back from injury. So they got 3 of those players some minutes, and yeah, it did seem to work because it seemed very early on in the second half that Pacific was starting to lose their legs.
Yeah, and they actually saw another red card in the last 10 minutes. So they were never coming back into this game in that second half. Kevin Cesari got sent off in the 84th minute with 2 really silly cards that he shouldn't have conceded, but it just showed the frustration that Pacific's players were feeling by that point.
I would say when I looked watching the match, Pacific looked pretty demoralized by the end, and like, honestly, who could blame them? It was a tough one, being kind of a very odd play to put you down 10 men from the very beginning. So
yeah, and if you look at the stats from this game, mostly thanks to that second half, I believe Cavalry really dominated in most important categories. They outshot Pacific 17-10, but Pacific only managed that 1 shot on target, which would of course be their penalty kick. compared to Cavalry's 9 shots on target. Cavalry outpossessed Pacific 70-30, generated almost 3 times as many passes, looking at 4 corners compared to 3 from Pacific. So in the end, it was a comfortable evening for Cavalry. And as I mentioned earlier in the episode, it puts them into second place with just 2 games left. So really a happy night for everybody involved with Cavalry, as well as their fans, of course.
And that brings us to this upcoming weekend, the last regular season home match at Spruce Meadows on Saturday at 5. Cavalry is going to be taking on HFX Wanderers.
Yeah, who are in last place at 8th spot in the table at the moment. Only 6 wins from 26 games. So it has been a really frustrating and kind of baffling season for Halifax, who we thought were going to look pretty competitive this year with some of the players they've added to their roster. But what is interesting is they're coming into this match, believe it or not, on a 5-game unbeaten streak.
The thing is, though, is despite that, their pathway to getting that 5th and final playoff spot looks a little rough. I think that strength of schedule is not in their favor, because I believe for their last match, they're going to have to play York United. So yeah, it's been an odd season for the Wanderers, and they'll be really going for a result, because they really, if they really want to have any chance of getting into the playoffs, they probably need to not be satisfied with a draw. They're probably going to need 3 points.
And it's going to be tough for them. I think it always is tough for Halifax to make the road trips to the West. If you think about it, this game is kicking off at 5 p.m., which if the Halifax players aren't accustomed to the time zone change, what would that be, 8 o'clock in Halifax? So it's a late start for them. Can't imagine they train at 8 p.m. So it's maybe going to feel a bit weird to kick off a game that late in the day. Can't say I'm expecting much from Halifax, but considering they do have, their playoff survival to play for, maybe they'll come out swinging. And we've seen them put a few goals past Calgary before this season.
Talking about Cavalry's playoff situation and their placing in the regular season, the Shield is lost, Scott. It's now a done deal.
Yeah, Forge clinched it, which we kind of knew would happen before this most recent game. It was really just mathematical that Cavalry could still retain the CPL Shield. But considering how the table looks right now, they still have second place to play for, which will give them a little bit of advantage when it comes to the playoffs in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I would say right now that when you look comparatively at Cavalry, Ottawa, and York, Cavalry's in the driver's seat. They need to get 4 points out of 6 in these final 2 matches, and if they do that, it doesn't matter what those teams do. That would be sufficient for them to get second. And
as mentioned, that game is taking place 5 p.m. at Spruce Meadows, last regular season game. So plenty of reason to go and check it out. I did hear that the weather is going to be favorable all Thanksgiving weekend, so not a bad way to celebrate the holiday.
This is Canadian FIFA assistant referee Mike Barbigan, and this is the YYC Soccer Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can have this podcast downloaded to your device as soon as it becomes available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other platforms. Check out our website at yycsoccer.com, where you can look through our episode archive and find other options to listen, including our YouTube channel. On our website, we also have links so you can buy Scott's book about Calgary soccer history online. You can leave us a question or comment in the Contact Us section of the website. You can also interact with us on social media, such as Twitter or Instagram or Blue Sky, where our username is YYC Soccer 403. Thanks for listening.